Have you ever stopped and wondered if the people you see every day, your classmates, your coworkers, are actually changing who you are? Well, today, we're diving into a fascinating study that asks that exact question. And the answer? Well, it's not what you think.
I mean, really think about it for a second. All those hours spent in classrooms, all those team projects, even just hanging out with your friends. Don't you sometimes feel like you start picking up their habits, their way of talking, maybe even bits of their personality? It's a feeling we've all had, and a bunch of scientists decided to find out if it's real.
We've all heard this quote, right? It sounds so true. But does it actually hold up in one of the most unique social experiments we all go through, the classroom? I mean, that's a group of people you're forced to be with. You don't choose them. So researchers asked, does the rules still apply?
So to figure this out, the researchers started with a really clear idea, a hypothesis, about just how powerful our peers might be. They basically predicted that the overall vibe of a classroom could slowly but surely reshape the personality of every student inside it.
Now, they didn't look at everything. They zoomed in on two specific personality traits from the Big Five model that are super important for doing well in school. First, you've got openness. That's all about your curiosity, being interested in new ideas. And second, conscientiousness, which is basically how organized, hardworking, and disciplined you are. The thinking was, these are good traits for school, so maybe they're contagious.
The whole hypothesis was actually pretty straightforward. It's like a kind of positive peer pressure. The idea was if you put a student in a classroom that's, on average, full of curious and organized kids, then that student should, over time, become more curious and organized themselves. It just makes sense, right? Well, let's see what the data actually said. And this wasn't just some small one-off survey. Oh no, these researchers went big to get a really solid answer. They set up two massive, separate, long-term studies to track what really happens to a student's personality when they're in the classroom day in and day out.
And the scale here is pretty wild. The first study followed, get this, over 5,000 students for 2 whole years. The second one tracked almost 800 students for an entire school year. In both studies, they measured each student's personality at the beginning and then again at the end, looking for any changes that could be linked to the classroom they were in.
So, after all that work, after tracking thousands of students and crunching all the numbers, the researchers finally got their answer. And let me tell you, it was not what they, or frankly, what any of us would have guessed.
97%. Remember that number, because it flips this whole idea on its head. A massive 97% of the differences in personality were found between individual students sitting in the very same classroom. That means only a tiny 3% of the difference had anything to do with which classroom they were in. The message here is loud and clear. The room you're in has a shockingly small effect on who you are.
So the first big surprise was this. Despite the idea that teenagers are constantly changing, this study found that their core personalities were incredibly stable. The kids who were curious at the beginning of the year were still curious at the end. The organized students, they stayed organized. People didn't really change all that much.
And here it is, the real bombshell. That core idea they started with, it just didn't happen. Being in a classroom with super conscientious students did not make other students more conscientious. And being surrounded by intellectually curious kids did not make them more open to new things. That whole peer contagion idea, it just wasn't there.
But hold on, because it gets even stranger. In the really big study, they did find one significant effect, but it went in the complete opposite direction. Being in a classroom that was on average very high in openness, full of super curious, intellectual students, was actually linked to a small decrease in a student's own rating of their openness over time. So, what on earth is going on there?
All right, so what is happening? The results just completely blew up the original hypothesis. To try and explain this mystery, the researchers looked at two different psychological forces that are always at play when we're in a group.
Exactly. If we aren't all just conforming to the group, what other psychological process could possibly be going on? Well, the answer might not be about wanting to be like everyone else, but about how we see ourselves compared to everyone else.
See, the researchers expected to see socialization, which is that pressure to conform, to fit in. But the results pointed towards a totally different and maybe even more powerful force, social comparison. This is where you figure out who you are by contrasting yourself with the people around you. The whole mindset shifts from, I want to be like them, to, okay, where do I rank compared to them?
This points to a classic idea in psychology called the big fish, little pond effect. It's a fantastic way to think about it. Basically, how you see yourself isn't set in stone. It all depends on who you're comparing yourself to. A really good swimmer might feel just okay on an Olympic team, but at their local pool, they feel like a superstar. Same person, same skills, but a totally different self-perception.
And this brings us right back to that bizarre finding about openness. Let's say you're a pretty curious person, but then you land in a class full of future Einsteins who are reading philosophy for fun. You might start looking around and thinking, whoa, compared to these people, I guess I'm not that curious after all. Your actual level of curiosity might not have changed one bit, but your idea of it has. You've just gone from being a big fish in your old pond to a smaller one in a new, bigger pond.
So, after this whole deep dive into personality and peer pressure and psychology, what's the bottom line? What are we supposed to take away from all this surprising research? Well, it really boils down to 3 huge takeaways. First, your core personality is a lot more durable than you'd think, even during those chaotic teen years. Second, that popular idea that you just soak up the personality of your entire class, according to this data, it's pretty much a myth. And third, the act of comparing yourself to others might be a way stronger force in shaping how you see yourself than the pressure to conform to them.
And this leaves us with one final fascinating question to chew on. If the average personality of an entire classroom doesn't really shape you, then who does? Is it just your 2 or 3 closest friends, your family? Or maybe, just maybe, we are shaped most by our own choices, no matter what room we happen to be sitting in. Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.